years ago, on Memorial Day weekend, this very weekend, I decided it was time to finally buy a new car. I had been driving my Corolla for 16 years, and I'm going to say that it was still going strong, but I was really feeling tiny, like a little thing as I creeped along the highway with all the big SUVs whizzing by. And so I decided I needed to buy a bigger car that sort of propped me up a little higher so I could see where I was going. So I gave my brother the job, he loves to do this, of doing some research before. And he finally, after asking me questions and doing whatever he did, he told me to go to 3 dealers, 3 different models, and to test drive some cars, find out about cost and so on, and then decide. So on Memorial Day weekend, I got up early and I hit the first dealership, and of course it's crowded because big Memorial Day sale. And I, took my, time. I drove 2 cars, and then despite the sales pitch, I moved to the next dealer, drove a couple of miles over, and I did that until I finally decided which one I wanted. And then I went back and went through all the paperwork to buy that car. Now, I was not actually trading in my Corolla, and I'm telling you this because, as you can imagine, now I have 2 cars and 1 driver. So, I'm trying to explain to the salesperson that I'm coming back for the new car, tomorrow with a friend or whatever. And I was told I had to actually drive that car off the lot that very day if I wanted to buy it at whatever bargain price it was. So I parked my Toyota on the road and drove the brand new car home. Now, Father Christopher may remember this, because you would think that after all of that, all the research, all the effort, everything, I was just living it up in my new car. But I complained day after day after day. Why did I, take on this new expense? I am one person, what do I need with that size car? I'm not environmentally responsible. He listened and he kept saying, oh, you just got buyer's remorse, whatever. For some reason, even though it was something I wanted and looked forward to, when I got it, I was still holding on to what I had before, to the way it was before. I was not living into this new wonderful experience, this new wonderful gift. I think in some ways, the invalid in the Bible story we heard this morning, the gospel story, was having the same experience. John tells us that this miracle happened at the pool of Bethesda or Bethesda, depending on which language. And the wonderful thing about the name of that pool is that it means house of grace or house of mercy. But this pool, was actually being fed by an underground well or spring of some kind. And the people believed that when the water was turned up, when it bubbled, an angel had actually touched the water, and the first person in the water would be healed. So you can imagine the gathering of people on the side of the pool. John says the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed, waiting. Any little disturbance of the water, there would be this rush down to see who would get there first, because only one person was going to be healed. And our friend, this invalid that Jesus talks to, has been waiting 38 years to be healed. 38 years. Hoping, waiting, wondering if he would ever be able to walk again. Can you think about what it must have been like as he saw his hope lost each time that water turned and he couldn't get there first? It must have influenced the way he thought about the world. It must have changed how he interacted with people. It must have affected his life in more ways than we can possibly imagine. 38 years was a lifetime in Jesus' time. If you lived to be an adult in Jesus' time, your life expectancy was 55. Most of his life was spent paralyzed, hoping, waiting for something good to happen. And Jesus saw him. And Jesus said to him, "Do you want to be well?" It sounds like, an obvious answer. There are many reasons why Jesus could have asked that question. Because truthfully, sometimes what we think people want fixed isn't really what is, their priority. But perhaps Jesus asked that question because Jesus knows that sometimes we get stuck in our old way of being, of doing, of thinking, that when something new comes around, we're not ready for it. We're not ready to step into this wonderful thing that has been offered. And the man doesn't directly answer Jesus' question. His answer in some ways show where his mind is. He says, "I don't have anyone to help me into the water." And that is true. Kind of. Because somebody brought him to that pool day after day or year after year. Somebody took him back home. Maybe that person couldn't just stay around hoping that that's the time that the water would bubble. But somebody was helping him. But he has been waiting and hoping so long that he can only think of what has interfered with his gaining wholeness. And Jesus does not react to his response, is his answer. What Jesus does is heal him. He doesn't ask the man, "Is your faith strong enough?" He doesn't see if the man has been a faithful follower. He doesn't in any way put down stipulations. He says, stand up, take up your mat, and walk. And the man does that. Now, you would think that he would be just filled with gratitude and happiness for what has happened after 38 years of waiting. But John doesn't tell us anything about that. Other gospel writers tell us of people who turn back to say thank you to Jesus or ask Jesus if they can follow him. We don't get any of that from this man. John just says, "It was the Sabbath," and our lectionary ends it there. End of part 1, cliffhanger. And I would like to say to you, next week, come back for part 2, but it's a different gospel next week. So I'm going to tell you part 2. The man takes up his mat, but it is the Sabbath. No work is to be done on the Sabbath. Taking up your mat is work. You have used energy to move something somewhere. It is work by the strict interpretation of the Sabbath rules. So the Jewish religious leaders said to him, "What are you doing? Why are you walking with your mat? Why are you carrying a mat? And this was a good opportunity for the man to tell the story of his new life, his risen life, the way God had touched his life. But instead, as the story goes on, what he does is he throws Jesus under the bus. He didn't know Jesus' name at first, but Jesus meets him again, and he finds out who Jesus is. He goes to religious leaders and say, "It's Jesus who told me to take up my mat." And as usual, we find in the gospel, the breaking of the Sabbath rule is something that will make the religious authorities hostile to Jesus and will actually be one of the reasons why they arrest him. He is living the old life, this man. He hasn't moved into the resurrected life, the life of all the possibilities, all the joy that Jesus gives us when we decide to accept the gift and the blessings, the grace and the mercy that happens when God touches our lives. I would like to think that that man who was healed, like me with my new car, came to feel joy after a while because I grew to love that car. And when I turned it in, the story started again. But I hope that as time went by, living into this resurrected life, this new life, this life where he can walk and move and work and go wherever he wanted to, that he will remember who touched him, who healed him, see God at work, and just be joyful proclaiming the good news of what had happened. You know, I think we are Easter people who have received in this wonderful way through Jesus' death and resurrection new life. But have we changed because of the resurrection? Are we still clinging to the old way of being? Are we living into the joy and the blessings, the grace and the mercy, telling the stories? Or are we pretending or not acknowledging that it is God at work that brings this blessing into our lives? May we, as an Easter people, acknowledge, actually seek and look out for the times that God has blessed us in big ways and in little ways, each and every day. And may we take up those mats, walk into that new life, and give thanks to the God who has so graciously and mercifully blessed us. Amen.
Amen.